On this channel alone, we've read a lot of stories about paranormal encounters under various circumstances. As scary and confusing they might be, most of them are basically brief encounter, a one-time witness, a single instant, or over a short period of time. But for some, if rare, paranormal associations seem to stretch over a much longer period of time, for years or even decades. It's actually not very different in real life. We come across countless people, but with only some we get to form a relationship, and only few of them would become a long term. Problem with such a paranormal context is, because of its given nature, one can never fully understand who it exactly is, why it is lingering around you, and wherever it's heading to. Today we are taking a look at accounts about long-haul encounter, or shall I even call it a long-term relationship with a ghost or paranormal being. Some are totally random, while some comes from a tragic history. So, here are 4 allegedly true stories from Korea about long haul with ghosts. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. It's a story my teacher told us during one class. He had a 1-year younger cousin who was his closest friend. On one holiday, the family got together at his grandparents' as usual, and the 2 best friends went out to play, and the cousin got hit by a minivan. Fortunately, it seemed like a light accident, and the cousin got up quickly and didn't complain of any pain. My teacher was then also just a young boy himself, and didn't know any better either. So they just left the scene and came back home. Came the evening, the young cousin started complaining about tummy ache. Only then they told the adults what happened earlier in the day. An ambulance was called in, but late at night in the countryside village, it took a long time for it to drive through narrow dirt road, and the cousin died on the way to the hospital. Apparently he had got a serious internal damage that wasn't obvious at first. A year passed and my teacher was back at his grandparents' for the holiday. He went to bed alone, missing his cousin, who would have kept his side had he still lived. Suddenly, he heard a frog croaking inside the room. It reminded him of how he and his cousin used to let a live frog in the grandma's room to prank her. My teacher was still just a boy, but he was convinced instantly that he shouldn't open his eyes. What can beat a young boy's curiosity? He couldn't resist to have a little peep, and saw his late cousin crouching down right next to his face, mumbling something endlessly and in an incredible speed. The teacher could just squeeze his eyes shut and pray for the longest night to pass. He talked about what happened the following morning, but no adults believed what an 8-year-old should say. A few months later, he heard his grandparents had moved out of their old home. The reason? Grandma saw something moving about her back when she worked in the orchard. When she managed to catch a good glance of what it was, it turned out the dead cousin. Grandma concluded his little soul was trapped by her house, so decided to move out. But unfortunately, that didn't help. Now abandoned by grandparents, the cousin's spirit started manifesting around my teacher for years on. Up until he became a uni student, he would hear footsteps of a little kid hopping around him when he was alone. The apparition seemed to stop when he started his military service, Maybe the ghost couldn't quite catch up when he moved away to the military base. One night, towards the end of the service, he was on the night guard duty in front of the ammunition storage. Then the orderly officer radioed and started straight shouting at him.
"Have you gone blind? Fallen asleep? What the heck are you doing?"
My teacher couldn't understand. They were keeping their position and nothing was out of order. He asked what was wrong, and the officer shouted,
"Are you stupid? Can't you see a little boy scribbling on the side wall of the storage? Right next to you?"
My teacher ran around the ammunition storage building to check, but he found nothing, let alone a boy. He reported back he didn't find anything, but the officer kept shouting,
"What? Can't you see the kid in shirt with Mickey Mouse and shorts?"
Hearing that, my teacher froze on the spot. Because those clothes the officer described were what his little cousin wore on the fateful day of the car accident. Fortunately, he didn't see his cousin around since he finished the military service. He could only pray that the soul of the poor cousin finally found its peace, wherever. I see a ghost. Just one particular ghost. I first saw it when I was 14. I was on my way back home after the cram school and saw a woman at the end of the alley to my house. Even from that far, I noticed what horrible state she was in. More than half of the face had melted down from burn, and the rest of the body was dripping red with blood. It was clearly not out of this world. I didn't dare to walk past her and had to call my parents to come and pick me up. My parents did, but they didn't take the ghost story seriously. But the ghost was at the alley every day since that day. At first I cried and took the other much longer route back home. But well, humans get used to even the most horrific things with time, and I could eventually walk past her just with my head turned away from her. But just as I evolved, so did the ghost. She started touching me. She would grab my wrist or touch my shoulder should I try to walk past her. I once again reported what was happening to my parents, but they still didn't believe me. They just told me my chi must have got weak and got me some herbal medicine that claims to boost one's chi. But thank God, since when the ghost disappeared. I just tried to forget it all as quickly as possible. 3 years passed, and one night I got my first sleep paralysis. I panicked a bit, but then remembered what one of my mates told me, that one can flex fingers to break a sleep paralysis. I attempted to flex my fingers, but that wasn't easy. I rolled my eyes downwards to look at my hand and passed out. That same ghost was there, holding my fingers down from moving and gleefully smiling at me. I had to plead my parents once again, this time with tears, and they finally took me to a shaman. The shaman wrote me a talisman and told me to keep it on me at all times. Seems to have worked so far, but I'm still scared when the ghost would return the next. Occasionally, I see an old man. I don't know who he is, what he has for me, but our encounters goes back to 7 years ago. My family had moved to a big town then, and I was fresh in the middle school. Winter dragged on that year into March, and the harsh weather and the stress from the change of the environment gave me a bad cold. My school was about 20 minutes walk from home. Bus would have been much easier option to commute, but having been a countryside girl all my life up to that point, I was frankly a bit afraid to use a bus in the strange town. So that day too, I was walking back home despite the fever and dizziness. There was a little hilly way on the way, not too high but quite steep, and the wind blowing down the hill was really harsh. My cheeks felt like they were going to burst, even my eyeballs felt like freezing that I could hardly keep them opened. But what else could I do but push on? And then, when I looked up again, I found myself in an indoor market. It looked a perfectly normal kind of such, with various shops lining up on each side facing each other. If I knew better, I should have found it odd already then. In that section of the town were hardly any shops apart from bars and karaokes. But I was new in the town, and all I could think about was that I was so ill and wanted to go back home as soon as possible. I just walked through the market to get to the exit on one end. Suddenly, somebody snatched my arm. A strange old man grabbed me by my arm and dragged me to the opposite end of the market. He looked like any normal old man, probably in his 70s, but his face was frowned with anger and his grip was so unbelievably tight that all I could feel was how painful it was before any fear and confusion. He shouted and swore at me. "What a dumb girl you are! You must be mad to come here!" And so on. I struggled to get free, but it was in vain. He dragged me so relentlessly that I inadvertently bumped hard into a passerby. I looked back to excuse myself. I still remember the man who was standing there looking back at me. The face, so pale that it looked almost blue, was further shaded by his protruding high cheekbones. He was all clad in black, from his black turtleneck jumper to long black coat. And his cold smirk. As soon as our eyes met, he started following me. The old man seemed to get even angrier and walked even faster. At the end of the market building, the old man burst open the glass door and practically threw me out, shouting never to come back. I fell hard, and I think I fainted briefly. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. According to Mom, I fell in the middle of a crosswalk and was almost crushed by a motorbike. A few years passed. I don't dream much usually, but this dream was so vivid and clear. In the dream, my family was driving in a car to somewhere. Then somebody jumped onto the road and waved us to stop. It was the same old man who dragged me out of the market. As soon as Dad stopped the car, the old man dragged us all out of the car, full of anger and swears. But Dad insisted that he had to keep driving. When he failed to persuade him, the old man turned to me and said sternly, "Don't let your dad drive today. You must stop him." I woke up alarmed. But that morning my dad was so much in a hurry that I didn't have a chance to talk about the dream, and he was off to work in his car. I got a call during the day that my dad had an accident. A heavy load fell from the lorry that was running in front of his car. Fortunately, it wasn't fatal, but Dad had to stay in the hospital for 8 weeks. Only later I told him about my dream, and he blamed me that I should have told him on the day. And the last encounter was just a few months ago. My parents went on a holiday for about a week, leaving me alone home. For the first night, I called in some friends and had a pajama party all night long. The following day, I went to bed knackered after friends left and had another dream. In the dream, I woke up with thirst and went out to the kitchen to grab some water. And there he was again, the old man. He grabbed me even before I could reach the kitchen and put me back in my room. He then told me to lock up the door and I should never ever open the door no matter what. I was confused, but sat quietly at one corner. Not long after, somebody knocked on my door. It was gentle. I asked who that was, and "It's me." It was Mom's voice, but I refused to open. The knock got louder, now with Dad's voice calling my name. The knocking carried on with a voice flipping to that of other family members or my friends, which drove me mad frightened. I woke up crying. I didn't want to be alone home anymore, so I stayed at my aunt's till my parents returned. What would have happened if I opened the door then? And who is this old man? Why has he helped me 3 times already? A friend told me this story after several bottles between us. I'll call him Chong-woo here for the sake of the story. We first met in the uni. The first impression of his calm demeanor behind his thick glasses was that he was just an ordinary boy from a well-to-do family. It took quite some time till I finally realized that his life wasn't really that ordinary. His mom passed away when he was little. He was told it was an unfortunate accident, but he later overheard adults talking among themselves that she made a last call to ask to take care of Chong-woo, that she suffered depression, and it all started with his dad's infidelity. His dad wasn't much more than a stranger to Chong-woo. He hardly ever talked to his son apart from leaving some pocket money on the breakfast table. He went through numerous girlfriends after Chong-woo's mom died. And one day, when Chong-woo turned 10, Dad introduced the glamorous woman as his new mom. Soon the new mom moved in with her daughter, who was 4 years older than Chong-woo and was just as glamorous as her mom. The new mom was hysterical. She watched Chong-woo's every move with hawk's eyes. If he got bad results from school tests, she yelled at him loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. And if he came back home later than usual, she would interrogate him if he didn't do anything funny. She checked on his phone and flipped through his diary. The only one the new mom couldn't touch was her own daughter. Her face under the bleached yellow hair had thick makeup on, always smelt of cigarette, and her school uniform was tailored back to skin-tight miniskirt. When her mom screamed at her, she stared right back and spit it out at her. "Crazy bitch!" Her mom would of course go mad, but she would just lock up her room door and turned up the volume of her stereo to max, drowning her mom's scream and swears. And invariably it was the mother who would get tired and withdraw after an hour or two. While her mom was a crazy bitch, Chong-woo was an idiot to her. Or so she chewed out at him occasionally when their eyes met. They didn't talk to each other much, but sometimes when both parents were out, she took Chong-woo to a fast food restaurant. The new mom hated junk food, so it was the first time for Chong-woo to have a taste of such food. Watching him gobbling down a hamburger, she as again called him idiot. For Chong-woo, there was somehow the clearest memory of his stepsister, sitting across the cheap plastic table of the fast food restaurant and ticking her long nails together as her usual habit. His stepsister died of motorbike accident when she was 17. Since then on, Chong-woo occasionally got sleep paralysis. Nothing dramatic. He would open his eyes in the middle of the night and find himself paralyzed, and then he could smell a whiff of cigarette and ticking noise, and then would fall back to sleep. Chong-woo attributed it to experiencing the death of his stepsister at sensitive teenage years. As soon as he got a place in uni, he moved away from home. He ignored all the calls and contacts from his parents and tried to become fully independent. He got a girlfriend too, a fellow uni student named Soo-hee, pretty and friendly and popular among colleagues. And around the time, the context of his sleep paralysis changed. One day he once again opened his eyes in the middle of the night, followed by the usual cigarette smoke. But what followed was new. Something whispered in his ears. He could hear it saying the name of his girlfriend, Soo-hee, clearly. And then all sorts of obscene and even sexually degrading swears about her. The whispering voice gave off sneering giggle all the time. With that change, it also came more and more frequently. What used to be barely once a month event became now 3-4 nights a week and left Chong-woo tired and disturbed. One day he confided it to a senior student, and he, to Chong-woo's surprise, took him straight to a shaman, who turned out to be the senior student's aunt. Chong-woo half-heartedly talked about his sleep paralysis, and the shaman's response was, "Well, there is something around you. Not particularly good, but not exactly malicious either." Such neither this nor that kind of answer didn't help him at all. Sleep paralysis continued regardless, and Chong-woo could not believe whatever there was not malicious when he carried on calling his sweet girlfriend in all sorts of despicable names. In the end, he broke up with Soo-hee not long after. On one hand, he felt somewhat guilty to face her when he could just helplessly listen to all the smears on her every night, and at the same time, he was so tired that he just wanted to end it all as it all flared up with his relationship with her. And indeed, his sleep paralysis backed down to the previous level. Just occasional whiff of smoke and ticking noise. Chong-woo could not help but wonder, though, was it really his stepsister's spirit, or some other naughty entity pretending to be her? If it were truly his sister, why should she disturb him so much with his relationship? And why now, too, when nothing such had happened when he had other girlfriends previously in high school? A few years passed, and Chong-woo rented a room after finishing his military service. The location was good and was relatively cheap, but something wasn't quite right. Mold would creep up on the walls, and food would go off quickly even in the fridge, and occasionally he found long hair in the room, though he was the only one living there. He just thought it was damp and traces of a former tenant, until he started getting strange recurring nightmare. He would find himself on bed and then hear something busily running about. When he turned his head, he found it a woman with a long hair, running around on all fours. And then she would suddenly turn her head to look at him, and with that he would wake up with sweat. Problem was, every time he had a nightmare, the woman in the dream would get nearer to him. First to the bedroom door, and then into the room, and so on. He got scared and tried to sleep at his colleagues or in his club room at uni, but they were all but temporary solutions. When the woman finally got right up to his bed, he got desperate enough to seek the shaman he met a few years ago. But alas, she was away and could see him only in 3 days earliest. Jung-woo decided to avoid sleeping in his room for those 3 days. But when he went back to the room to pick up his textbooks and thought to relax a bit while charging his phone, he unwittingly dozed off. And without a miss, the woman on all fours appeared in his dream again. With loud steps, she jumped up on his bed and on him, and started to strangle him. He could finally see her face clearly, blue-skinned like a corpse, and yet her eyes were all bloodshot red, and her mouth was smiling ear to ear. Is that it? Am I going to die? Jung-woo thought. When suddenly, the woman was pulled backwards and off the bed. He smelled familiar whiff of smoke, and for the first time he also saw clearly a woman with hair bleached yellow. She was beating the woman with the long hair. Jung-woo had never seen anybody beating the other person so mercilessly and thoroughly. When the long-haired woman passed out completely, the yellow-haired one grabbed her by the hair and dragged her out of the room. Before disappearing, the yellow-haired woman looked back. It was exactly how Jung-woo remembered his late stepsister, as she sat across the table in the fast food restaurant. And she spit it out. "Idiot!" With that, Jung-woo woke up. He cried a while with strange sense of relief and sadness. When he visited the shaman the following day, she said as soon as he walked in, "See, I told you she didn't mean to harm." The horrible long-haired woman never appeared in Jung-woo's dream again, and he just got very occasional sleep paralysis with a whiff of smoke and ticking noise. Jung-woo says he still offers memorial ritual for his late stepsister, with hamburger and fries and all by himself. It's not traditionally proper, but she wouldn't mind, he says. Jung-woo says he's still not entirely sure if the spirit is really of his sister or something else pretending to be her. But I myself think it is indeed his stepsister. Jung-woo doesn't seem to know, but Soo-hee, his ex, was not the bubbly girl he thought she was. She was deep in some sort of cult and was notorious for squeezing every penny out of boys who fancied her before spitting them out dry. So, my friend lives with a ghost of his sister, who is not particularly good, but not exactly malicious either. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. As I briefly mentioned in episode 24, in East Asian philosophy, nothing that happens in life is purely random. We think everything happens for a reason and out of certain context, and that is especially so with the people we get to associate with. From today's stories, I see the same kind of sentiment extending to paranormal encounters too. But would you have liked a guardian angel in the form of a ghost hanging around you too? Or would that be too nerve-wracking regardless of its good intention? If you enjoyed my work, please leave my video a like and a comment, or two, and please consider subscribing to my channel to help it reach 1,000 subs, the magic number I could turn it monetized. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link's in the description. Buy Me a Coffee supporters will get an access to my new video a week before everybody else. Thank you. I'll come back next Sunday with more stories. Until then, stay safe and take care.